Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. Before we dive into tonight's terrifying tale, a quick question. Do you dare wear the fear? Our exclusive Shadows merch is here. Hoodies, tees, and more, designed for those who embrace the darkness. Get yours before they vanish forever. Link below. Part 1. The Homecoming. The air smelled of damp earth and pine when we set out on that trip. One last getaway before autumn bled into winter. The forest outside Black Hollow was dense, the kind of place where the trees pressed in on you, their gnarled limbs stretching overhead, blotting out the sky. Max trotted ahead, tail wagging, his golden coat catching the last slants of dying sunlight. He was always happiest in the wild, bounding over fallen logs, sniffing at the underbrush. My wife, Claire, laughed as he plunged into a pile of crisp, dead leaves, sending a flurry of amber and red spiraling into the air. I remember the sound of the river, the slow, gurgling whisper of water against smooth stones as we set up camp, the scent of wood smoke curling into the sky as we built a fire, the cold bite of beer against my lips. It was perfect, until it wasn't. That night the forest changed. The wind died. The trees stopped rustling. The usual nocturnal sounds, crickets, owls, the distant yipping of foxes, fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Even the river seemed to hush, its voice swallowed by something deeper, something vast and listening. Max sat rigid by the fire, ears pricked forward, staring into the woods. "What's he looking at?" Claire whispered, her voice barely carrying. I shook my head. Probably just a deer. The light trembled in my grip, sweeping over the trees. The forest swallowed my words. I searched for hours. The night stretched on, thick and endless. My breath puffed out in frantic clouds, sweat cooling against my skin. By the time I made it back to camp, Claire was sobbing. We stayed an extra day, calling his name, scouring the woods, but he was gone. And when we finally left, heading back to a house that felt emptier than before, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching us from the trees. A year passed. Grief settled over us like dust, thick and choking. We stopped hiking, stopped camping. The house was too quiet without the sound of paws clicking against hardwood, without Max curling up at our feet every night. Then, last week, Claire came home late. I was washing dishes when I heard the door creak open, followed by a sharp intake of breath. The sound of something soft shuffling against the floor. "Honey," Claire called, voice trembling. "Come here." I wiped my hands and turned the corner, and then I saw it. My wife knelt in the entryway, fingers buried in thick golden fur. The thing beside her panted happily, tongue hanging loose, tail thumping against the floor in stiff, mechanical beats. The world tilted. My throat went dry. Because the thing in front of me, it looked exactly like Max, but this was not our dog. Part 2. Cracks in the illusion. I wanted to believe it. I really did. The moment I saw that golden fur, those warm brown eyes, that familiar panting smile, something inside me cracked wide open. A piece of my heart that had sealed itself shut after Max disappeared suddenly ached to be whole again. But the moment it turned to look at me, I knew. The first thing was the smell. Max had always carried the earthy scent of pine needles and damp leaves, the musk of a dog who lived for the outdoors. But this thing smelled wrong. Beneath the surface of damp fur, there was something else. A faint, metallic tang, coppery and sour, like old blood. Like meat left out too long in the sun. I stood frozen in the doorway, dish towel still clutched in my hand, as Claire cooed at the thing, running her hands through its fur. It leaned into her touch, tail wagging in a jerky, unnatural rhythm. "Isn't it amazing?" she whispered, her voice unsteady, almost on the verge of tears. "I told you he'd come back. I told you he wasn't really gone." I opened my mouth, tried to say something, anything, but my throat felt like sandpaper. The thing stared at me, tongue lolling, tail thumping against the floor in precise, identical beats. Thump, 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 like a metronome, like clockwork. Then it tilted its head, not the way a dog does, not with curiosity or confusion. It was too slow, too calculated, like it was studying me, testing. My stomach knotted. I don't understand," I finally forced out. "Where did you find him?" Claire's fingers twitched in the fur, her eyes flicking up to meet mine. She looked exhausted, dark circles bruising the skin beneath her lashes. "He was just there," she said, voice soft, almost dreamy, "near the old hiking trail, sitting by the road like he was waiting for me." "Waiting for you?" My voice came out sharp, unintended. Her eyes darkened. "Yes, waiting for me." I glanced down at the thing. It was still watching me, body unnervingly still. Its chest barely rose and fell, as if it had to remind itself to breathe. Max had never been a still dog. Even in sleep, his paws would twitch, his nose would sniff at dreams only he could see. This thing didn't move unless it was supposed to. A creeping nausea rose in my stomach, but I forced a tight-lipped smile. That's incredible." Claire's face relaxed. She turned back to it, pressing a kiss between its ears. "See, Max, I told you. He's happy to have you back." The thing's lips pulled back over too many teeth. I barely slept that night. The next few days only made it worse. It was little things at first. The way it never blinked unless I was looking directly at it. The way its nails clicked against the hardwood floor in perfect rhythm, always the same pattern. Click, 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 pause. Click, 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 pause. The way it would sit in the corner of the living room, staring at the TV even when it was off. But the worst was at night. I woke up the first time to the sound of breathing. Not Claire's soft, even breaths beside me. Something else. Something too close. The room was dark, the shadows stretching long in the moonlight. My skin prickled as I listened, heartbeat hammering against my ribs. Then I saw it, a shape by the door, too tall to be a dog. The outline of a body, limbs stretching in angles that didn't make sense. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers dug into the sheets, too afraid to move. Then a shift, a sickening, crunching sound like bones grinding against each other. And suddenly, it was a dog again. The silhouette lowered onto all fours, the slow sound of nails against wood, the wet, dragging noise of a tongue licking at lips. Then the door creaked open and it was gone. The next morning, Claire was humming in the kitchen, making coffee, acting as if nothing had happened. I stared at the thing sitting by her feet, its head resting on her lap. It turned its gaze toward me, unblinking, tongue hanging out in a perfect, practiced smile. And for the first time, I understood. It was waiting. Part 3, the horrifying truth. It started with the chewing. A slow, wet, deliberate sound, echoing from the living room in the dead of night. At first, I thought it was just gnawing on a bone. That was what dogs did, right? Even though I had never actually given it one, even though I had never once seen it eat. I rolled over, rubbing my face, groggy and disoriented. Claire was still beside me, her back rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. But something felt wrong. The chewing didn't stop. It was rhythmic, methodical, almost thoughtful. Flesh peeling, tendons snapping, the slow scrape of teeth against something too soft. I sat up, pulse hammering in my ears. The bedroom door was open. I didn't remember leaving it open. The air smelled rancid, thick with that same metallic tang that had clung to its fur from the moment Claire brought it home. But now it was stronger, heavier, like raw meat left out too long. Like something dead but not quite rotted. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The floor was cold. Too cold. My breath fogged slightly as I stepped into the hallway, the dim glow of the nightlight casting long, stretching shadows against the walls. The sound of chewing grew louder. The thing was waiting for me. It sat in the center of the living room, facing away from me, back hunched, golden fur matted with something slick and dark. Its head jerked unnaturally with each bite, something wet and sinewy dangling from its maw. And then I saw it. The rabbit, or what was left of it, a mess of torn flesh and exposed ribs, fur peeled back like paper wrapping, entrails glistening under the faint light of the television screen. It hadn't just eaten it, it had opened it, meticulously, like a child dissecting a bug, like it wanted to see what was inside. The thing that was not Max lifted its head, lips peeling back over too many teeth, jaw stretching just a little too wide. A long, slow lick of its muzzle, too human. Then it smiled. My stomach churned. I staggered back, hand gripping the wall for balance. Max had never killed anything in his life. He had chased squirrels, sure, but he had never even so much as caught one. This wasn't instinct. This was curiosity. And then it spoke, like it knew I was watching. Not with words, but with the wet, gurgling sound of my own voice. A horrible, choking imitation buried deep in its throat, warped and broken like a cassette tape played backward. "Come here, boy." A perfect echo of my voice calling Max from the woods that night. My blood turned to ice. I backed toward the hallway, heart hammering, my entire body screaming at me to run. But the thing only tilted its head, watching, studying, testing. Then, slowly, it began to stand. And not on four legs. Bones cracked, joints shifted, the limbs lengthening, contorting, its spine snapping upright as it rose onto 2 feet. The skin rippled, something shifting underneath, stretching, twisting, trying to decide what to be. My stomach lurched. I turned and bolted. I sprinted down the hall into the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. Claire stirred. "Babe, what's wrong?" I couldn't speak, couldn't think. I pressed my ear against the door, listening. Silence, no clicking of nails, no breathing, no slow, deliberate scratching against the wood. Nothing. For the first time in days, the house was completely, unnervingly still, and that was somehow worse. I don't know how I got any sleep or remember falling asleep at all, just waking up part 4, the final revelation. The next morning, Claire was in the kitchen humming as she poured coffee, completely oblivious to the way my hands shook when I took the cup. The thing was curled at her feet like a perfect, obedient pet. I could barely look at it. It hadn't moved from that spot all morning, just watching. Not in the way a dog watches, not with curiosity or affection, but with something else. Something patient, something hungry. "Are you feeling better?" Claire asked, turning to me with soft concern in her eyes. "You barely slept." "I'm fine," I lied. She reached over, pressing a hand to my forehead, frowning slightly. "You look pale." I forced a smile. "Just didn't sleep well. I needed to get her away from that thing. I needed her out of the house." "Why don't you go into town today?" I suggested, trying to keep my voice light. "Pick up some groceries, maybe take a break. You've been cooped up all week." Her brow furrowed. "Are you sure?" "I don't mind staying." I swallowed, the unease tightening in my throat. "I'll be fine." "Really?" She hesitated, glancing down at Max, the thing pretending to be Max. It tilted its head. Claire smiled, scratching behind its ears. All right. I could use a little fresh air, I guess." She grabbed her keys, pressing a kiss to my cheek before heading out the door. I waited, listened as the sound of her car faded down the road. Then, slowly, I turned to the thing sitting in the kitchen. It was still watching me. I let out a shaky breath, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. "What are you?" It didn't move, didn't blink. Just stared, tongue lolling, tail thumping against the floor in that same, perfectly timed rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Something inside me snapped. "You're not Max," I hissed, my voice shaking. "You never were." For the first time it moved. Slowly, deliberately it stood, not on all fours, on 2. My breath caught in my throat as its body shifted, stretched, unfolded. The fur rippled like liquid, limbs lengthening, the bones snapping into place. It wasn't a dog. It had never been a dog. Because it had. The door creaked inward, inch by inch, revealing nothing but the yawning darkness beyond. And then a shadow moved, tall, too tall. The thing that had once been Max stepped forward, its limbs wrong, its frame bending as if it hadn't quite decided what shape it wanted to be. It was still wearing him. The fur, the teeth, the glistening eyes. But now, up close, I could see the seams. I could see where the dog ended and something else began. The edges of its jaw were loose, the flesh sagging like an ill-fitting mask. The skin at its throat rippled, as if something inside was shifting, pressing against the surface, trying to get out. I staggered back, breath caught in my throat. The thing cocked its head, studying me. "Why do you run?" The voice came from its mouth. But the lips didn't move. It wasn't speaking. It was remembering, stealing pieces of sound, assembling them into something it thought I would recognize. "You called for me." The night in the woods. The desperate, pleading shout as I searched for Max. I had called for him, and something else answered. I was shaking. "You're not real." The thing took another step. "Then why do you see me?" The words slithered beneath my skin, wrapping tight around my skull. I could hear it inside me. And I knew with a sick, clawing certainty it had been there all along. In my mind, in my memories, twisting them, rewriting them. How long had it been doing this? Had I ever even found Max that night? Or had it found me? "Let me see you." The voice was softer now, patient. The thing reached up, placing one long, twisted hand against its own face, and pulled. The skin peeled back like wet fabric, the golden fur stretching, tearing, falling away in limp, glistening strips. Beneath it, nothing. Not darkness, not flesh, just a void, a gaping, twisting absence where something should have been. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. Because the longer I looked, the more I understood. It had no shape of its own. It had no face, no body, no form. It only had what it took. And now it wanted mine. The void twisted, and then it lunged. Part 6, the last goodbye, it lunged. I barely had time to react. My body moved on instinct, hurling itself backward as the thing collapsed toward me. Not moved, collapsed. Like a puppet with its strings cut, its flesh sloughing off in wet, rotting sheets. The golden fur, the legs, the snout, it all peeled away, unraveling midair. I hit the ground hard, pain splintering up my spine, but I barely felt it, because the thing wasn't a dog anymore. It wasn't even humanoid. It was just a mass. A shifting, writhing thing, pressing against the walls of my mind, forcing its way into the cracks. Let me in. It didn't speak, not in sound. It was in my head, inside me, whispering in a voice that sounded so much like my own. I gritted my teeth, pressing my hands to my ears even though I knew it wouldn't help. This was what it did. This was what it was. It didn't kill. It didn't hunt. It replaced. I felt it then, pulling, tugging at my skin, my bones, myself. Trying to unravel me the same way it had unraveled Max. And for a moment, I almost let it. I could feel the void, the sweet, empty promise of letting go. No more fear, no more questions. Just a new face, a new life, just a new me. Then a voice. Ben, Claire. Her voice drifted up the stairs, hesitant, concerned. She was home. And suddenly the void was afraid. The mass shrank. The pressure lifted. I gasped, sucking in air like I had just surfaced from drowning. It didn't need to take me. It just needed me to wonder, to never be sure, to always doubt. Claire touched my arm, warm and familiar. Come on, she said gently. Let's go sit down. You need to rest. I let her lead me downstairs. But as we walked, I kept my eyes on her hands, waiting, watching, wondering. You made it back for now. But the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video. Subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.